Yo, what's good, y'all? UW back again. Now, this is definitely going to be more of a serious video that I'm bringing to the table. I do these videos like this, really serious, in-depth commentary, and discussion from time to time. Now, if you personally talk with me, y'all know I can go in a web of different ways and interconnect and go in depth on a lot of thoughts, whether in philosophy, history, the sciences, you name it, all right? Political spectrum and whatnot. But on this channel, I don't like to do that too often. I like to talk about a lot of what's going on in various mediums of entertainment, give more of a, if you will, whether it be in sports or in pro wrestling from time to time, I've started to do that. Dealing with the martial arts, even though some of these aren't really entertainment, you know, a lot of them are made out to be entertainment. Occasionally some things on the news, a lot of anime and manga, a lot of dealings with comics and cartoons, you name it, because there's a lot of just casual talking about those. And I love to bring a more critical aspect to the matter. Sometimes movies. But this is a subject I've talked with a good friend of mine, Eric, for close to 2-3 years, maybe about 3 years now. Okay. And I told him that eventually I would sit down and talk with him, but it's a long, in-depth, drawn out thing. And I said eventually I'll probably do a video. And dude, I have like 18 points. I knew that I would have at bare minimum at least 10, probably about 20. And there's probably way more points that I can bring to the table, but this is more of a general limitations of science video. We're not even dealing in specifically some of the stuff you can get into with biology, chemistry, a lot of social sciences such as history, sociology, psychology. Okay. We're dealing with just general limitations of science itself, or themselves, the sciences themselves. And what I found out is, I talk about this often, how modern science is a bunch of pseudoscience, right? Modern science, folks be acting like it's the gospel truth, like God himself has spoken. Oh, excuse me, can't use God, because a lot of people don't even rock with that. Science disproven. Science can neither prove nor disprove the existence of a God, for one. For anything like that, especially if you're talking about a being that exists outside of time and space, but that's a whole nother conversation. But it's stuff like that. Science, you know, people are like, oh, we have science now. We have all these explanations. No, we really don't. We barely understand jack. We can't even truly understand gravity, for example. One of the most fundamental forces on this planet, if not in the universe itself. This is just a little sample. That's one little area. Science can't explain that much. And I can explain in this video, I'm going to get down into the nitty gritty as to why science can't explain that much. Now, I love science, which is why I'm so critical of the BS that be going on out here in these streets and in academia. It's asinine, some of the stuff, some of the articles. And then people will post articles, not even read the articles that they post. And then I'm sitting here going, oh my God, this lack of understanding is completely ludicrous and absolute lunacy. Now, first limitation of science. And this should already start off. When y'all hear this should already start off. I don't want to seem like I'm ranting on this video. I'm going to just set up all the groundwork before I get into the in-depth stuff. First limitation of science. It deals with science itself. What is science? Very often I ask people that question. They can't tell me what science is, which is pretty sad, considering the fact that ever since in elementary, whenever I was in earth science, you know, which dealt with geology, meteorology, and various aspects that dealt with earth and the sciences, in general overview, they talked about this. When I was in biology and chemistry and physical science, human anatomy, I'm pretty sure that talked about as well. It broke down what the basic definition of science was. Still, people miss and are not well informed on this. Science is simply data gained via observation of the 5 physical senses. That's it. That's all science is. Meaning in this case, why is it a limitation? That science can't account for the immaterial. Science can't deal with things that don't have anything to do with your sight, with your hearing, with your smell, with your taste, and with tactile, with your touch. Right? Why is that a big limitation? Because of a lot of stuff that's being talked out here, we can't deal with it scientifically. We have to find another means to, but people still try to deal with it scientifically, and that's why you get all these whack-ass theories out here. Theories. I should say hypotheses, because they're not theories, because you cannot touch them scientifically. If it can't be dealt with in physical, empirical study, then it's not scientific. It's ascientific, it's complete pseudoscience, and you shouldn't pay attention to it. Point number 2. Science doesn't deal in absolutes. Can't deal with anything like always or never, or 100 or 0% or 100%. That's why you'll see on the can of like Glade it said 99.999%. Science can't establish things. So even well, science says, guess what? It can't 100% guarantee you anything or 0% guarantee you anything, which isn't bad. But when it comes to an epistemological situation, when it comes to knowledge and you need certainty, you can't rely on science to give you the certainty. It can only deal in most probable and plausible. And even that's depending on the knowledge of the current era. Which means we're always making discoveries scientifically. Yes. Point number 3. Third limitation is science can't make value judgments. Good, bad, better, or worse. Now, before you want to come in, because I know how some maybe agnostics or some so-called atheists might come out. More efficient is not a loophole for this. Right? Because I know some will try to say, well, we can, calculate to how something's more efficient, how something's more productive. That doesn't inherently make it always better. You can take that from a economic standpoint, for example. Yes, you want to be more efficient. You want to be more productive. You want to do less, a lot of times that's seemingly better, right? Conservation of energy, conservation of motion, you can do better. But there are ways you can go about that debunk this. I could use fighting. I could use sports. There's a lot of people who don't do the most efficient motions, but some are the best ever. Now, they don't do wild stuff, but a lot of people don't do the most textbook stuff. And the same thing, you can look at all fields. Some scientific discoveries are found because of the seemingly less probable method was used. Better, best, good, bad. You can't determine it scientifically. You just can't deal with it because it's qualitative. And I'll get back to that later, but keep that in mind. Science can just give you the data. If anybody tries to convince you that science, this is the best path to go scientifically, then that person doesn't understand science, and you probably shouldn't really be listening to that person when it comes to that. That person probably has some bad advice to give you. Just saying. May mean well, just has bad advice. Coming in number 4. Science is derived epistemologically, knowledge base, from mathematics. Okay, it is. Mathematics, just as a little side note, is based upon certain fields of epistemology, a certain scope of thinking. It means that science is restrained to quantitative and isn't designed to deal with the qualitative. It's like I was talking about with the third point. Science can only deal with the numbers. It can't deal with quality. It can't explain, why certain colors are this way, or, what's the best look for fashion, something like that. Something that takes beyond simple 1s and 2s, 3s and 4s, or binary code. Science doesn't deal with that, and it's not designed to deal with that. But yet, some people will try to extend science. Or we can understand that, no, we can at best understand that a number of people prefer this. We should try to figure out why they prefer it. but we won't really ever come to a concrete conclusion because science can't deal with that. You can't put a number to everything, contrary to what some people believe. Coming in number 5, science can discover what, when, and how, but it isn't designed to address the whys, aka purposes. Science can discover what something, for example, forensics, what something is, can discover a body, can discover when an event occurred, all right, when a death occurred, for example, can discover how the individual died, but it can't discover the why, the purpose of why the individual died, the motive, if you will. It can't. And if you think of anything with purpose, that's going to the realm of reason, logic and reason. That's going to the realm of philosophy. Now, some people will say, well, science is logic determines science. No, it doesn't. Logic is an entirely different field from science altogether, because logic can go into some wild stuff, but you're dealing with the mind at that point. You're not dealing with the 5 physical senses. You're not dealing with those attributes. You're not dealing with the material world. Thus, you're outside of the scope of science. Coming in number 6, the 6th limitation. Science, as with mathematics, is dependent upon constants and consistency. It can't account for randomness and chaos. Science, you need consistent examples. You need constants. You need certain laws to be like the laws of thermodynamics, Newton's 3 laws of motion. You need these to be consistent. You need the tides to come in at a specific time on cycles. You need these things to be consistent. You cannot have random events. That's one of the reasons science can't account for things like miracles. That's one of the reasons science doesn't understand a lot of the natural phenomena, because it is not consistent. Now, that doesn't mean these events don't happen. That doesn't mean these events lack anything. That means science isn't designed to deal with those things. Science can only address things that have a constant function. Period. That's why sometimes medical science is constantly trying to update itself, because, for example, viruses are constantly dealing in a somewhat state of evolution. That's why science can't solve all the world's problems, because science is based on things to be consistent, and a lot of the world's issues can go in a myriad of ways, seemingly random. Even though they might not be random, they're seemingly random. Or chaos is created. Chaos just doesn't happen from a vacuum. Chaos, I could talk about this at another time, but chaos is something that was caused, and science can't account for it. It can't address it. Coming in at number 7, science is limited by time and space. Now, this one should be basic and self-explanatory. You cannot scientifically, go, because we're talking about the material world, you can't, go outside. Now, you could say, well, what if there's an immaterial being that deals with things? Sure. But it's within the confines of that closed system of time and space. All the laws of science are confined, at least the science that we use, are confined to time and space. They're not confined to the eternal. They're not confined, they're not accessible to the eternal. They're not accessible to the immaterial. This one is a very basic limitation. So if you start talking, you ever hear some people that start talking about other elements of reality, then sorry, they're not dealing with science. They're not dealing with the system that we use known as science. Coming in at number 8, science relies upon repetitious experimentation, peer review, and data confirmation of the masses, such as surveys. What that all means is you need to be able to experiment, you need to be able to be peer reviewed, you need somebody to be able to check. You can't just have a one-off event and say, yeah, this is what my findings are. Others need to be able to find it as well. Data confirmation of the masses, meaning, for example, when you talk about qualitative, even though science doesn't deal in qualitative, well, what do we consider attractive? When you have, a sample size of 100,000 people, which you will very rarely see a study that big. But if you had a sample size of 100,000 people and 100,000, 75,000 of them, 75% viewed certain types of eye color. Well, you can say that most people prefer that eye color, and you can possibly do studies as to why that is attractive, and you go from there. But that's the thing. It has to be a constant. You can't have, for example, if we happen to live in a world or universe where, the state of gravity fluctuated, let's say you had a Toriko type world and you had certain parts where the gravity would just fluctuate, or, speed of light wasn't consistent and things of that nature, mass, the laws of nature weren't consistent. Well, then you're not having our system of science. That's just the state of affairs. Moving on. Number 9, science is dependent upon detailed observers being present during events. This is one of the biggest issues I have with people who deny ancient history, who deny or have problems. They can't seem to understand this because they've been so indoctrinated to think in the scientific manner. That's a massive limitation of science. It doesn't mean an event didn't occur. It doesn't mean the event wasn't accurately depicted. That just means that the people who were there and eyewitness weren't sitting down and doing a scholarly report. That's not how things work out here historically. When you see a car accident, you're not going, oh, the car went 60 miles an hour and da-da-da. That's not what happens. And that's one of the biggest problems we have in modern society, is that folks want these detailed analysis that just doesn't occur with most events. You don't have the time to sit down all the time and do these long, drawn out analyses of what may or may not have occurred. Especially when that wasn't the focus of the people, especially when you're struggling on the daily. You're just like, well, this works. Oh, this makes sense. And that's what you go by. But yeah, that's a massive issue. It's more so not an issue inherently of science, but it's an issue with the modern perspective of science. Moving on to number 10, trying to keep this thing moving and keep this train rolling. Number 10, science is forced to rely on previous confirmed past data. Meaning, for example, with meteorological predictions, we can't just outright predict what the weather's going to be tomorrow. We go, this is what happened on such and such day. This was the likelihood and the conditions, and boom, boom, boom. This is the probability of what's to occur. It's not bad, but it's massively limited, and it's not prophetic. It's not a great confirmation, especially if you live in a subtropical and tropical region. Initially, I'm from South Florida. Let me tell you something. I feel bad for the meteorologists. Like, those who could predict, those were MVPs, superstar level goals. That the guys at the National Hurricane Center, these were like heavily revered guys because these guys could actually foresee what was coming. Most times, they could predict sunny days, but let me tell you though, rain could pop up anytime. You had to be your own meteorologist and look at the sky, feel the atmospheric pressures, smell if the rain was coming. You feel me? Listen, you had to use your fire. You had to be a scientist yourself in order to determine the weather. You couldn't rely on the meteorologist. And this is part of the reason as to why. Coming in at number 11, science is only contained to operate within the laws of physics and the laws of nature. Now, that in of itself can be an entirely different video, but I hope that's pretty self-explanatory. Laws of physics and the laws of nature. Already pre-established laws before we ever can do what we deem science. It's just how it is. It's the nature of the beast. Science did not come first. It came after the preset laws were established. Coming in at number 12, science is only a modern application of certain areas of magic. Now, this is an important thing to know. I may or may not do an entirely separate video on what magic is and things, and may deal with some things with the occult and other things of that nature. But what I will say in this, magic is simply, there are three forms of magic. There's magic, and there's magic with a K, then there's sorcery. And like I said, that's an entirely different subject. But what I will say in the case of magic with the C that I'm talking about here is the manipulation of the laws of physics and laws of nature. Science can't deal with things like clairvoyance. Science can't deal with things, I don't know. A lot of times with levitation, we can bypass a lot of the things. We utilize a lot of the laws of nature, but we can't do with some of the things. Now, it's funny because some people are like, oh, magic, that's just the ancient way, that's outdated. No, just because you have some answers as to how does not replace, it does not replace the concepts. We are massively lacking in a lot of areas that magic spoke on and touched about. But like I said, that's an entirely different discussion. But keep that in mind. Just because we have science now does not invalidate magic or things, subjects that feel like alchemy. All right. It means we have some modern explanations of how we think things are and how things seem to be. But we don't even have complete answers to what we think we do. Keep that in mind. Now, yes, certain things are practical, but some things have been practically used since the dawn of man. How to make beer, for example. We discovered that a long time ago. Were they not using science then? Start to think. Coming in at number 13. We're almost done, y'all. Science can neither create life nor cause immortality. This is a big thing. Show me when they have created life. Any scientists. Show me. And show me how they've truly prolonged life. Or made anyone immortal. Death is simply the termination of life. And simply this. Do you know what natural causes are? Oh, probably never thought about it, have you? Natural causes. Let me back up real quick. The human body. The body itself. We're not dealing with the mind at this point. Whole different discussion. Deal with that a little bit later. But the human body is simply a biomechanical / biochemical machine. Whatever you want to, how you want to break down a composition. It's a machine at the end of the day. Just like a car, your washing machine, refrigerator, they eventually will break down. You have to fuel them. You have to make sure they're running. You have to maintain them, but they eventually will break down. It's the same thing as a human body. Lack of motion, you got to properly fuel, you properly maintain, but you can maintain it all you want to, but eventually it will break down. Natural cause is simply the cessation meaning the stopping of the natural functions. Blood no longer goes to the brain. A lot of times dying of sleep, like the heart just doesn't work like it used to anymore, and it stopped functioning. That's natural causes. When science can address immortality and can create life, then come back to me. But it won't, because it's not designed to, because science doesn't deal in those forces. Those are forces beyond the limitations of science. You can say, well, what if in 500 years? Still won't happen. Sorry, fam. It's not going to happen with science. You're going to have to deal with some way more powerful stuff than science even taps into. Unless men become gods now, for lack of a better term. It's not greater science. It's just greater forces at play. Coming in at number 14. Science cannot forge stars and other celestial bodies. Another basic thing that science can't do. Because you're talking with astronomical power. You can say, well, what if in 500 years you're dealing with a wild, mad hypothesis that has no basis in anything scientific? There's no possible way. Do you understand? In order to create stars and planets and such, do you understand the amount of power, the amount of resources, the amount of better understanding we'd have to have of the laws of nature and of physics in order to be able to craft these things? Probably have never thought about it like that, have you? And not only just to craft it and forge it, to be able to sustain it. We're not just simply talking about a metal planetoid. I'm talking about an actual planet or an actual star. A bunch of condensed gas exploding but staying intact. A heap of chunk of rock that can produce life, potentially. That can have an entire atmosphere. Yeah, good luck with that, fam. Coming in number 15. Science cannot explain sentience. Sentience, intelligence, feeling. Again, immaterial. It's outside of physical explanation. This is, again, one of the simplest things I have on this list. Coming in at number 16, science cannot explain consciousness. Once again, immaterial, and it goes back to the state of the mind. Some folks can say, well, what about the brain? And what happens? You're like, well, the brain seems to have, and I had a good long discussion with my friend Eric about this. Now, the brain is simply the connector. Imagine you have a computer, all right? But the computer needs to be plugged into through a cable. It needs to be, or whatever the source is, a battery, whatever the case may be, needs to be plugged into the power source, right? It's the same thing. The consciousness is the power source. You can have a body function, sure, but it's not the same, is it? No, because it doesn't have the consciousness backing it. The brain acts as because we're dealing in a physical world, it acts as a conductor, to be able to relay consciousness, the immaterial, into the material. It's a conduit. That is all the brain is. You say hormones. Yeah, there's hormone effects on the body, sure. But the body is not the same as consciousness. And that's an entire deeper discussion, but I hope folks understand what I'm saying. Sure, the body can react. Sure, you can have testosterone flow, estrogen, all these things flow. But that doesn't determine, especially if you're dealing with sentient creatures or semi-sentient creatures. You can, for example, even though you feel physical pain, you want to lurch back instinctively, you can keep your hand over a fire. You can cause yourself to drown. You can cause yourself to starve, which goes inherently against the instinctive nature of the natural body. You can sleep deprive yourself. Well, to a point you will shut down, you will eventually fall asleep. But that's the thing. Consciousness is separate from the body. It's number 17, almost done. Science cannot create atomic or cellular structures or invent new DNA and RNA for new species to survive and reproduce. That statement alone says it all. Until science can start developing life, and I don't mean just cloning tech, I don't mean just splicing, I mean create new sets of DNA and RNA and create new sustainable species that can survive in the wild, in life, and can also reproduce to continue the species, unless you somehow create a species on some ultimate form course from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure where he didn't need to reproduce. He was the life. But again, that goes back to science cannot deal with immortality, right? Since science can't deal with immortality, you got to be able to create something to be able to continue on. You can be like the Celestials, whoever you want, and be experimenting on life, but it's not the same as actually creating life. Till you can create life, you're subject to just the inevitable. And by that point, now you're playing God. Science doesn't account for this because there's too many aspects that are beyond the material that account for life. It's not just the material. It's not just putting a clump of cells or a clump of gray matter in the brain and saying, here, shoot some electricity and bam. No, that's not how it works. Okay? You don't have a Frankenstein's monster situation just by shooting some electricity on a dead corpse. That's not how it works, because there's much more to life than just animating dead matter. Sorry, I don't have any evidence to prove it because science can't touch it. Now, finally, on point number 18, science can't account for evolution. What I mean by that, natural selection, adaptation and isolation, not the foolishness you hear from the quote unquote theory of evolution, actual evolution that goes on out here. When I mean it can't account for it, it can't predict it because there are a myriad of paths in which things can develop. You don't know what may happen. A storm may isolate one population from another, and that area causes them to grow differently and survive. Height and, situations may arise. For example, why do giraffes have long necks? Because trees, the lower branches were gone and the trees were up there, and the higher necks survive and they pass on that favorable gene. But here's the thing, mutations, most of them, I believe it's 98% are not benign, they're malign, they're not beneficial. So most mutations have them die. Natural selection also inherently isn't a good thing. It just happens, who mated with whom and who passed on whose genes and all these things. There are too many different factors to account for. For example, somebody may seemingly come from genetically the inferior, and then you could have somebody like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Michael Phelps. You don't know who gonna come from what. With all the mix mashing of genes, dog. You don't know who gonna be the next Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who gonna be a Thomas Edison, who gonna be a Nikola Tesla, who gonna be an Albert Einstein. You don't know what a person may become, for example. And that's the thing. You don't know what a species might evolve into 500 years down the line. Science can't deal with that. It can't deal in the prediction factor. It can't. And so hopefully in this video, I broke down. I know this is long and lengthy, but hopefully in this video, I broke down as to why science is so limited and how much foolishness is going on out here. And hopefully I can put at ease a lot of people's concerns. Sure, we find discoveries, and I love science, but let's pump the brakes on a lot of this stuff out here, dog. I hear too much foolishness. People wonder you come too hard on stuff because you're not dealing in science. Again, let's deal with the reality, the truth, the data. Let's not jump to these preposterous conclusions. Unexpected one. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me your thoughts. Have a beautiful day, beautiful night. Peace, y'all.